Welcome to Higher Ed Athletics. I'm going to do what I'm going to call the AD rundown of the week. The rundown is what I've watched or read over the last week-ish that I think are most helpful to learn from or pay attention to moving forward, specifically about the athletic director position, not just college athletics. So before I get into a lot of things, I did instant reaction here. Tonight, I'm recording this late at night on Tuesday, July 8th. And there was an On3 article about the after Joe Castiglione retirement announcement that said Mitch Barnhart is now the longest tenure AD in the NCAA. I assume they meant Division One, but I would just have to say before I get going, that's not really true. And Joe wasn't either. Sienna, Marist, Sam Houston State ADs all have served in their positions at their schools longer than Joe and Mitch. And ADs of Bellarmine, NJIT, and Youngstown State have also served longer than Barnhart, but not as long as Joe. Either way, incredibly impressive. And yes, he will now be the longest tenured FBS Power 4 AD, Mitch Barnhart at Kentucky. Things to watch develop. So some things that are just on my mind, and they're not necessarily in the last week, but things that I've my doctorate class finished. I got an A in stats, but it's kind of I made notes on my phone. I'm sure a lot of you do this. I make notes on my iPhone when I see things in the ticker that spark an interest that I want to follow up on later or an article. And so a couple of things right now. The Cal co-AD model, and I can't tell if it's brilliant or just someone not being able to make a decision right now, and appointing two people as co-ADs for the 25-26 academic year. Both of them have worked in the department for a very long time, and it feels like this period of kind of seeing how things shake out with Ron Rivera as the GM of the football program and what that new relationship looks like between a P4 football GM and the athletic director position. And it also makes me wonder if some schools will do this co-athletic director and fully separate the attention grabbing decisions from the day-to-day operation. So they're calling it an innovation model, I think, in their press release. If it works, do they just both become the permanent athletic directors? That'll be interesting. And maybe football GM stays its own separate thing. So it'll just be interesting to see how it plays out. And, back in the day, athletic departments, and you can kind of see this book right here, College Sports, if you're watching this. It's a history book of college sports. And college athletics used to have male and female sport athletic directors for a time. Do we get back to the point where we have not obviously just men or women sports, but really this truly define what's already probably been happening is this athletic director is here for the bigger department-wide and institutional decisions of a certain amount of sports and macro, and then to run programs and to meet with head coaches. Do we assign that to the co-athletic director? And so I think every athletic department probably has a structure like this based on how the AD operates at their macro level and what they assign to their deputies or their senior associate ADs. However that works out, I'm sure we do it, but does the Cal model come up as a way to basically define this? And I think it'll just be interesting organizational structure wise what it looks like after this. And then the Stanford AD decision, I think there was an article in the ticker that said a decision's probably in the next couple of weeks. So who will that AD be? And then remind you, they also have a GM for football, and it's Andrew Luck. As an Indianapolis Colts fan, we're big Luck fans around here. But it'll be interesting. How does Luck become relationship-wise with this athletic director? I'm kind of curious if they just kind of surprise everyone and say Andrew Luck is going to absorb the AD duties as well. He's very interested in other sports, a huge soccer fan. He's went to Stanford. His wife went to Stanford. He went back there after he left Indianapolis, and he has more than just a football mindset. And he is a very intelligent person. They also have, I think they're calling it like a assistant GM or deputy GM. They have a whole staff kind of helping with football. Now, Luck is going to have to come up with a permanent football head coach solution. Frank Reich, the old Colts coach, is actually serving in the interim role for head coach for Stanford this year. Not going to be the selection moving forward. So Luck will already get his whole year to decide who he wants to become the football head coach. But another dynamic of this GM role is, does he just become the athletic director? It's a very big athletic department. There's very capable administrators that maybe don't want to be the AD. So it'll just be interesting to see how that happens. Now, if they do go with someone outside of the kind of, I guess you would say Luck would be my out of left field pick, but the Stanford president is a business academic discipline background, and it makes sense that they will probably want to go private business or pro sports as their next AD. We're starting to see that with Maryland going pro sports, North Carolina coming with a NASCAR pro sport person. So I just guess it'd be interesting if it's based on where they're at in the country, but also the reach they have with alums in the business world and tech and policy based on the president's background. Does this person come from that or pro sports? And I really think that if it's not Luck as the kind of the inside hire, that I don't think we're going to have an inside college athletics administrator become the AD at Stanford. I really think they'll do something different and surprise people, and that might be why the previous AD has now left. Now, the other thing I want to pay attention to is this, what I'm going to call the return of the emeritus position. And I think if we frame it with names, we could call it the Gene Smith, Ross Bjork model, basically with the handoff of duties. When he left Texas A&M to go to Ohio State, Gene Smith gave a long runway for his athletic director position. And then Ross has said in multiple interviews how valuable it was to be around him and just be able to look at things, learn things, get some ideas while he's at Ohio State, but also getting an understanding without having to come in and make all the decisions. You can kind of learn. And it just seemed like such a great model. And so now, is that going to be we saw that with North Carolina with Bubba, and then now we're going to see that with Joe Castiglione at Oklahoma. So Bubba and Joe are both going to kind of serve in these vice chancellor or vice president advisor roles to the not vice president roles, but advisor to the president or chancellor, or holding the emeritus AD title, and not just a name title and name only. It sounds like these two are going to be really helpful, and I just wonder if higher education likes to mimic each other, and college athletics is nothing different there. That maybe this is the kind of their new way with the longer runway. Will something like this happen again? And you look at a situation like Stanford, they don't have any runway at all. So whoever does get selected has to come in and be the leader right away. I think that kind of gave North Carolina some buffer zone to be able to go ahead and say, hey, clearly they were thinking about this for a while, but they got a NASCAR executive. Oklahoma, so Joe's going to be here, I think, for the next 2 academic years after he's done, at least one more year. You imagine the president has said that they're going to take their time because they have that long runway. And yes, they probably will. I mean, it could be 6 months, who knows, that before they have the next AD. But Joe has been there so long that this person can become an outsider, can come in and learn higher education. The president of Oklahoma has been there for decades too. So there's just, I could see them going traditional to try and, I think what he says, the next AD will be Joe 2.0, but they also have to be a visionary. And so if it's not someone like a Zach Selman or, someone that has ties, Mike Alford's been tied to there already early. Kirby from Texas Tech, I assume that he wouldn't leave Texas Tech for that right now at his age, but you never know. Alford, not knowing really what's going on with Florida State and the ACC and the future there, maybe he does. I don't really know. I'll go back into their backgrounds one day down the road. But it was just an interesting, not really interesting, but we're now seeing these two succession plans come out just in the last few weeks, and I really do think Gene Smith and Ross Bjork were on something there, and I think there was something like that with Notre Dame internally too. So it's an interesting model that we'll see if we have this moving forward, and I just think it's a great way to be able to kind of give you more options of who you bring in. And then the next thing I want to talk about is Danny White. And so there's been a lot of media hype about Danny, rightfully so. SPJ wrote an article about him for being the AD of the year. His collective bargaining proposal article from Ross Dillinger and Yahoo Sports. That was really something that he's not really shied away from. So I encourage you, part of this is just me saying what I've been reading and what I think you need to read. You need to read that SBJ article. You should probably read the collective bargaining proposals. These all came out in the last couple of weeks, so anyone watching this probably has already seen these. But I have this interesting thought that I've always had, and I mentioned it to Dondi Plowman whenever I had her on Higher Ed Athletics a couple years ago, and I'm sure I mentioned it to Kevin White too when I interviewed him. But Dondi Plowman, the chancellor of UT Knoxville, she is the leader of that campus, but she is by trade, by academic discipline, is a change agent. So that is what she does. I mean, she goes in and she's an organizational leader, studies changes. I just think it is such a missing detail that people don't realize, except maybe now, because I think it's been mentioned, but everyone knew Danny when he was at UCF, that he was this innovative thinker and that he was smart and he wasn't afraid to say what he thought. I respected the hell out of that. I thought that was awesome. I still do. Anything that Tennessee does, I mean, other than them beating my Hoosiers when I was working there in athletics in the Gator Bowl, that was the only ill will I had towards any Tennessee. I love all the country music songs that are based on the Tennessee Volunteers. But one thing that works with Danny White at Tennessee is that him and Donnie Plowman, they are the best duo in college sports right now, and it's not even close. They seem to be on the same page. They love their respective schools. They knew that there's this like 20-year gap of not having success, so they both come in here. One of the first things Donnie does is convince Danny to come, and just the turnover that you'll see just in the sheer numbers and dollars of that SBJ article, that I really think these two together will push this collective bargaining proposal to serious talks. And if it's not that, it'll be something else where I just don't see them departing this kind of leadership mentality, because they're obviously, there's a lot of smart people in the industry, but I like that they're both smart, intelligent, but they speak their mind, but they also do it in a way where they're not just thinking about UT, they're thinking about college athletics and higher education. And I just have so much respect for both of them. And then the other thing about him is this Tennessee top deputy spots probably expose you to such an incredible amount of innovation, freedom of thought, like I've talked about, and this heightened expectation level that you can't help but sink or swim. And if you can swim, you're gonna have a really good chance of, reaching your career goals. And Alan Green is now the Pitt athletic director, but before that, he was working on Danny's senior staff, and I thought that was interesting. I think the Tennessee State AD had spent time there as well. But there's been such great leaders come out of Tennessee athletics ever since Danny's been there, and UCF too, when he was there, and probably even earlier back there at Buffalo. But what I thought was really cool is that leading to Ryan Alpert right after all this hype of Tennessee and Danny White and the AD of the year. You then kind of see this love of his staff that he talks about and how hard they're working. And then what do you see? You see Georgia Tech making the announcement that Ryan Alpert, senior deputy AD, top deputy for Danny White at Tennessee, is now the Georgia Tech athletic director. And I did a prediction on this one. My prediction wasn't exactly right. I knew it wouldn't be. It'd be pretty cool if it was, right? I was kind of paying attention, wondering when it was gonna. I did a HEA briefing on this, so I felt like I knew the Georgia Tech, but he didn't mention Cabrera what exactly he was looking for. So I had to kind of make split hair decisions on like, okay, who am I going to predict? What am I going to look at? And I really thought that if he went external, it would probably be, why not do the same thing as you did with J Bat? And yeah, I did get some things right on that prediction. So I will say Tiffany Grimes of Purdue, I had mentioned her as one of the few people that I mentioned that would probably be a candidate. What I found interesting was there's a D1 ticker article from the local paper in Atlanta that it looked like she was a finalist or semifinalist. So she had that. Mike Babinski, the Purdue AD, used to be the Georgia Tech AD. Tiffany Grimes came to Purdue from Alabama, so she worked with Jay Batt at Alabama. So it just seemed like this might be the thing to do if they were going to kind of go that route again. I also said that I thought Palumbo had to be considered because he was the interim AD, had previous AD experience, but it didn't seem like he was going to be the next person, and that I thought that he would leave and go work at Michigan State with Bat, and he did. Michigan State, after I put that article out, a senior staffer left. They had already had some leave whenever Alan Holler left. But then, the news the morning of the decision, today, I guess, it was announced that Palumbo would go to Michigan State and really makes sense for that too. So I did get those two things of the few predictions I made right. But I really think this is a home run hire for President Cabrera. And if you look back, I kind of think he went to the same playbook that got him J Bat, and it'll probably work again. If you look at Alpert's background, it's just I feel silly for not even mentioning him. I don't think I can do a big time hire without looking at the Tennessee athletic staff directory, but I was close because I did look back at Ohio or excuse me, Alabama ties to when I made my predictions, and so I had a couple more in there, but just really happy for them all. Seems like Georgia Tech fans are gonna love that. And then the Bubba Cunningham. So we talked about the succession plan and what I thought that would be, but I did think it was interesting just to add some kind of flavor to this of what I thought is. So they hired NASCAR's RFK Racing president Steve Newmark and or Newmark, and he had served on the advisory committee for Bill Belichick hire, and so Belichick comes in, all of a sudden he has a new boss. There was speculation on who actually had made the decision to hire him. There was speculation that maybe uh, Bubba would go to Michigan State because the president, Kevin Krakowski, had been coming from North Carolina. He had some Midwest ties already previously, like at Notre Dame, Ball State, those schools. So it just seemed like that probably wasn't going to be the case. But now that there's this succession plan, NASCAR, for those that aren't aware, is huge in North Carolina. So here in Indianapolis, we're huge for IndyCar teams. There's a lot of them located here. Well, NASCAR, capital of the world, is pretty much like Mooresville, North Carolina, and the whole state of North Carolina. So it's a big deal that had ties to North Carolina, I'm sure, and maybe a political nature of being in the state. Not sure about that. But the fact that he was on the advisory committee for the Bill Belichick hire is great. But I also just can't stress enough, as I mentioned earlier, having Bubba there is going to be huge. And he's one of the most respected people in the industry. But I also found it interesting. So now we've got North Carolina goes with a NASCAR, which for one, I've always loved NASCAR sponsorship since I was a kid. I have like 40 NASCARs that are now my 9-year-olds. But I just loved like the unique sponsorships and just being unapologetic about sponsorship. And I always said, one day, I know it's commercialization of higher education, but one day college athletics should probably go the NASCAR route. And so maybe we will at some point, but I always loved NASCAR growing up here in the Midwest. But with that being said, they go with this direction. Maryland goes with a Atlanta Braves team executive who did have a little bit of experience at Ohio State on the education side with the foundation, but it makes me think schools will give this idea real consideration to go external. And so I mentioned about Stanford. Rutgers should be announced soon too. It'll just be interesting. Are we going to start seeing domino effect of outside people coming in? And if so, is it more likely to be the places where they have an established AD that is willing to stick around and kind of show them the ropes of higher education and college athletics and the politics that comes with that? So all of that just Rutgers, you wouldn't have that at Rutgers, obviously. You wouldn't have that at Stanford. But is there any correlation there between your outgoing AD, like a Kentucky. Is Kentucky, when Mitch Barnhart decides to not be the AD at Kentucky anymore, is he going to do the same thing? And then will they bring an outsider in? Or will they just say, we want to find Mitch 2.0? It's just these types of things. I know a lot of people might not care about it, but I study this stuff. It's just studying leaders, studying organizational structures. It's just so fascinating to me. And then one of the last news things before I end it with some things I watched, some great interviews, is really late tonight, like just a few hours ago. Diana Sabau leaving for the deputy AD job at Maryland, according to College AD. And, when you look at it, I always thought it was an interesting hire not even 2 years ago because of her background. It didn't seem to fit necessarily Utah State. But whatever. The previous background was at the Big Ten office. Before that was also she was a deputy at Ohio State, and maybe she missed that Big Ten experience and just really wanted to get back to a larger university because it is very different. And so who knows with the situation. Seems like there was probably Ohio State overlap or at least ties with the new athletic director because from what I read and heard that he worked really closely at times with Gene Smith, and so clearly Diana worked closely with Gene Smith. So it just seems like an interesting situation right now. But with the timing, I have to stress, I said this several times, president situations matter. So, yes, she's only been there less than 2 years, but Utah State has had an interim president since February because the president, who had been there, I think, less than 2 years, is the one that hired her at Utah State as the athletic director. Well, she leaves to become the president of Washington State. And so now, how long, if you're wanting to kind of wait on this Utah State AD job, what is the process going to be? They don't have a really in-depth senior leadership necessarily of who you think might be the long-term permanent interim. They have one deputy AD and they have some other senior staffers, but they've now had multiple ADs and presidents just in the last 4 or 5 years. But with this president search underway, no idea. Haven't looked into it, see how far along they are. But, since February, we're now going into a new academic year. You'd think they'd probably want someone in by August. But you imagine the next president is going to get the right to hire the next AD. And it'll probably have to be the very first thing that the president does. And that also might change who they select as president. What's your background with college athletics? What's your background with hiring ADs or anything like that? So, do they go back to the drawing board of the president search? I don't think an interim president right now, this far along and this late into the summer, is going to make the AD hire whenever there's been so much uncertainty about that position for the athletic department. So everything I read, it seems like Sabau had a great tenure there in her almost 2 years. I think it was 2 years in August. Had to obviously handle a lot of internal conflict whenever she came into that role. But it'll just be interesting to see where they go with that next direction. But where do they go? And so I looked up some of my database. So some of I keep a database. I'm building it out on current ADs, but also trends in AD hires. And one of the things I look at is who went where for undergrad or grad school. And there's only one current AD that attended Utah State for either, and that was Matt Billings, the current Portland State athletic director, who has only been there since November. So I doubt he leaves. He's been at the school a long time. So it'll just be interesting, but there's not a lot of. Now, this is only of current ADs, so I'm not saying it's not in deputies and senior associates that could get into this position, but there's just not a lot of, I guess, Utah State people that might become the Utah State AD. And so then you look, do they go institutional peers? Do they do conference peers? Going to be joining a new conference? Do they look for people from that conference that are serving in the roles? It's probably what I would do. I think the Sun Belt's done that a lot where they kind of pick from each other whenever they have an opening. So just, it'll be interesting for the Utah State. I know that can't even confirm. I mean, it's just College AD put that out there, and I trust D1 Ticker when they make the decision to put the breaking news out there. So like I said, this is coming out. Maybe she's staying. I don't know. Then the last thing I'll end with is great interviews. So I've slowed down my interviews. Right now, to be honest, I didn't go to NACTA. I will go next year, and hopefully interview people there if I'm still doing that. But there's been so much turmoil and changes going on in college athletics for a long time. But right now, with the House settlement, everything going in on that, a lot of people having to lay people off, do things like that. It just didn't feel appropriate for me to keep asking ADs to come on and talk about this. There's um, there's already established companies that do a great job to do this, and someone had told me a lot of them aren't going to want to give you good answers or answer tough questions necessarily because it could be turned around and used against them in a courtroom maybe one day. And so that some of them have probably been told to be careful with what you agree to talk about. Um, I just didn't really want to put anyone in that situation. So instead, I've really been consuming great interviews from people, whatever's in the ticker or I've set my Google Chrome up now where I get my own stuff that's not even in the ticker, or it will be eventually. But I try to find my own sources too. But there's been a lot of it that I've really enjoyed, and so the cows. I've never been able to do a cows. I'm a huge fan of Will Reece from hearing about him on a podcast, but also hearing from other people talk about him. I'd love to connect if anyone can connect me to him to see how I might be able to kind of help. But they do a lot of great podcasts. Some of the people they've interviewed I've had on in the past, but I still learn different things, and that's what I think is awesome. And Troy Dannen was on there recently, and I there's a lot of nuggets in here. It was like an hour long conversation, worth every minute. I didn't know anything about Troy Dannen other than that, he had went from Washington to Nebraska and that he was in the news for that. I mean, I knew he had a long background of being an AD at multiple places, so I didn't like judge that move. It just seemed like it was a great opportunity to go to Nebraska. But I learned so much. And so just a few things on here that I took note of on my phone when I was taking a walk listening to this was initial assessment and conversations with head coaches, and then having an institutional leadership meetings early on to understand how athletics, for one, is perceived, but also how can they be continue to be or become a better partner across campus. And I think that's great and is and very necessary. There's also a reason usually why a job is open. He wasn't specifically talking about the current job. I think he was talking more about throughout his career and then the industry of maybe when you're considering taking jobs. And it said learn what they are and the priorities based on that. It's usually already defined for you, basically on what you're walking into. And I think probably people are, based on where they're at in their career, they get to make that luxury of, yeah, there's probably something I got to deal with that I don't want to deal with, but like I have to get this AD chair. So some people probably pay attention more about that than others do. But I also like he said he's not a micromanager. The people around him are experts, but just make sure they set the standard for the industry. And I thought that was a really good way of putting it. He said he used trial and error at Tulane to see what management structure he liked to operate in. And then now it's basically the same structure at every place. The only difference is a different place. And so I thought that was interesting. Another kind of nugget, he said he hires head coaches over assistant coaches typically because you can't afford the risk to hire an assistant, especially as budgets get tighter and buyouts get more magnified than they already are. You need someone that can manage the program. Now, everybody's going to have a different approach based on what school you're at. I think he had mentioned that at this level, I can't take a risk like I could somewhere else. And so that was interesting. And he also said, kind of going back to my Danny White and Donnie Plowman thing, is if you're not a change agent right now, then things are going to be difficult for you moving forward. And so I like that. And I think he's 100% correct. There is a book that I need to show everyone too that they really need to read about being a change agent. I'll need to mention that too. And he did say a couple more things. I'm still not ruining it because there's so much stuff in here, but he said if a decision or project can't hold up against scrutiny, then it probably needs to be questioned even further. talking about a football stadium document, I think is what he was referencing here. When he first got to Nebraska, there was one that hit his desk that basically the staff said, yeah, it's pretty much done, but you still have to sign off. And he just didn't. And he started asking questions. And then I think he said he made some changes and just didn't rush into it. And he says, your career is going to be defined by big decisions you made, including the ones you didn't. I don't want to rush into something. So I thought that was interesting. And him knowing that also kind of made me think, okay, well, he went to Washington and then he left for Nebraska. So he's clearly, if he used that advice, that just tells you there was something compelling about going to Nebraska and that he knew that that decision eventually would play out good. And um, he seems to be doing great things in Nebraska too. And so I thought that was interesting. And then just giving some shout outs, he said he learned from a lot of great ADs in the American Conference, particularly throughout his career. He credits mentors like Bob Bowlesby, Bruce Rasmussen, Pat Kraft, Mac Rhodes, and Mark Harlan. And I think I might have missed a couple of others that didn't make it on my notes, but I just thought it was a really great interview. Cal's puts out a great podcast. They do different segments in there that I wish I would have thought of. So it just it's really cool to see them. They put that out monthly, so you should do that. If anyone can get me to a Cal's event just to be a fly on the wall as I study these people, I know I'm not trying to be an AD, so I probably wouldn't get the invite, but I'd love to be a panelist, or not a panelist, to host. And if anyone can connect me there, try. The other thing is Dan Bartholomew from Western Michigan. So he was on The Journey, which is produced by CS Connect, and Dr. Brad Bates interviewed him for this one, and another like 45 to 60-minute conversation, and I just loved it. I didn't take as many notes because I was driving home from work with this one, so I didn't write notes. I stopped to get gas and I just typed in a couple of notes, but there's just so much in it that people just need. Like, there's so much going on at Western Michigan. And when I saw it come on, I was thinking, his name was linked to Michigan State, and I was like, really? Like Western Michigan, Michigan State? I totally get it now. They won the hockey national championship, but they're doing a huge construction project with the city and like a recreation area slash arena. Just seems like there's a lot going on in Kalamazoo. My brother works at Michigan State now, but he was at Eastern Michigan, so I've always kind of played or paid attention to these Michigan schools, especially in the MAC. And I just honestly didn't realize how awesome things were going. But he talks about his background at Pitt. He spent a decade plus at Pitt in several roles, and how he stuck it out there with multiple athletic directors that he really learned a lot from. So I think there's so much nuggets in there. He also said that he always keeps some speeches ready to go because you never know when you're going to be asked to speak at something. And so a lot of you probably do this, but he says he keeps it thematic. Usually goes in with maybe three themes of main points, and then he kind of sets it up like an outline where he can go more detailed with each of them or one of them based on the crowd. And it always made me think. So in my previous job, I got to see a lot of what goes on with speech writers and how they're outlining a speech for whether it's a fundraiser or whether it's targeting different audience, and you're playing to the audience while also focusing on your strategic plan or your fundraising goal or the mission. And I just thought it was great. You don't hear a lot about speech development with athletic directors, and maybe they have staffs to do it. Maybe a lot of it's just private conversations or, you know, off the cuff remarks that don't require a speech. I just found it very insightful, and I can imagine it's been really helpful for him there. He also, the last thing I'll say about that is he has informal meetings early on individually with his new hires within the first couple weeks, and I thought that was awesome. I'm sure a lot of people do that. Uh, yeah, I've been fortunate to work for some awesome people in athletic directors, um, and getting to have the one-on-one conversations are always cool. It reminded me when I left IU athletics that our athletic director had called me after like 5 p.m. on my cell phone just to thank me for helping us get through like an audit and sticking around and the work I put in. And he knew I was an IU alum, and I'm now back at IU, but I had left the department, left the university, didn't know I was coming back. But I just really, it made me feel special. It made me feel that like, wow, he's so busy, yet he's still connected with me on a one-on-one basis when he didn't have to. And so whenever I heard Dan talk about that with his informal meetings, I think a lot of people need to consider that. That same AD knew exactly where my office was, and he had to pass my office to go to lunch. So every once in a while, he just pop in and say, "Hey." I think people like that are great people, and that's Scott Dolson at IU. I think he's one of the best in the business. A lot of you don't hear from him because he focuses so much on IU. He's been there his whole adult life and working hard for IU. But I just thought that was really cool when I worked in athletics and how he treated me and other people. And so hopefully you all do that too, that when either now or when you are leaders. But a lot of respect for him at Western Michigan, Dan Bartholomew, and I'm probably butchering his name. I apologize. My notes that I read from iPhone notes don't recognize his last name very well, and I should have checked it. But that was through CS Connect and the journey. If you're not on Connect, I really think you need to be. I'm not looking for jobs on there, but I really love the content they put out. And it's just specifically, it's like the LinkedIn of college athletics, and it's just awesome stuff. They always put great interviews out there. There's more on here, more videos that I just didn't get to put out. But another one they had on Connect was with Drew Turner, with talking to David Harris at Tulane, and they talked about the search process. I liked hearing the backstory from both of them of how basically from opening interest to sealing the deal. I really took out of it is David Harris is a really ethical person, gave really good advice for current athletic directors that are considering going to another school. And I think you might start seeing some athletic director or some college presidents go after more sitting athletic directors, maybe from what's perceived to be a lower level or lower conference, because they've been able to manage people in the department. And so I think his advice here is really good. But he mentioned that he has this theory where, not theory, but this model and motto of don't leave campus for an interview without the first talking to your president, your current job. He talked about how difficult it is to focus on a search whenever you're also still the AD. And he said it's entirely different than when you're trying to go from that like top deputy or senior associate to the athletic director because it's already aware to people that you're trying to do that. Um, I think he felt like I'm being under contract at this school. I at least had to let my president know. But then Drew gives up some great details too about how they did that process and as far as the search firm approach, and then they go into depth about, oh hey, by the way, right when you get here, you have to do a football search, head coach search. So just another great article. There's been so many, and I'm long-winded enough with this, so I'll end it here. But that's just my AD rundown of the week.